Hello. Hello. It's Thursday, 26th of March. Nice to see you. I've just said at least three times. Somebody commented, you do say rather a lot. I've stopped saying Uh, right. I'm wondering how some of you are getting on with homeschooling. Not quite how I thought it would be. I'm not trying to get my children to do very much, I have to say. It's beautiful weather. We're lucky enough to have a garden, so they're spending quite a lot of time outside. But I did set them to do some writing this morning, which was quite funny. So as some of you might know, I have three sons. So the 11-year-old, he's working on something he's already started. He has really grand plans. He's absolutely determined, he thinks, that it's going to be a novel, a proper full-length novel like one of yours, he says to me. And I pointed out to him that those took about, say, 4 hours a day, maybe 5 days a week for 3 months. So I set him to do some writing for an hour. And after half an hour he came out. Then I don't know what to write. It's going by far too fast. I'm far too far through the plot the way I thought it was going to go. So we talked it through and we made a few ideas, came up with a few ideas and how could he address this problem and that problem. And he noticed some of the things that I actually find really quite difficult, like how you get time to pass in a story without it being clunky. Anyway, he noticed that he was having trouble with that, and he said, it's so hard. I thought, yeah, exactly. Anyway, son number 2, 8 years old, super keen to have an hour to be left alone to himself to write, and he did spend his hour writing, and he was very pleased to be writing on the note block that I use, using the pens I use, and he did a good job. And he's keen enough to come back tomorrow, so that's good. Son number 3, not quite so good. So he's nearly 6, he'll be 6 on Saturday. Very capable. He can write more or less anything he wants to write, and there are some mistakes and things, but he's not quite 6, so that's fine. He's trying to write an alien story. We started it yesterday and he told me the whole story, or he could come out with a page worth of writing verbally, tell me first this one says this and then that one says that and then he looked round and she squealed. He's got it all, but trying to get him to get it down on the paper, forget it. He's picking his nose, he's staring out the window, he's fiddling with his pen, his pencil. Oh, honestly, I don't know how on earth his lovely teacher still has any hair left, because I know for a fact he's like this at school. So anyway, that's how we're getting on. I hope you're getting on better. We're on chapter 7. Where are we? That's chapter 6. I need a bookmark, don't I? I need to put a bookmark in. I might do that today when I finish. Okay, what's just happened? Oh yes, Joe is back in Lucy's time. He's discovered that actually she got quite badly punished for his disappearance before. So she's going to pretend that he's somebody else this time, and she's going to dye his hair, she's decided. And she's going to get one of the other servants or slaves, they're slaves in fact, she's going to get the slaves to help her. Okay, right. Okay, chapter 7. The important thing is to come up with a good reason for you being here in the first place. I think you need a letter of introduction. Lucy stood up and began to pace around in the small space between the shrubs. You need to be seen arriving as well, she went on. We don't know how long you're going to be here, but we do need to do it properly this time. So how are we going to manage that? I think I'll ask Septimus to help. He's one of the scribes. He could write a letter from your mother asking if you could stay here because she's suddenly been taken ill. Who am I this time? Joe asked dubiously. Lucy thought for a moment, then clasped her hands together, clearly pleased with herself. My mother had a friend when we lived in Verulamium. She was called Severina Orbiana, she said. She moved away to the north, but she had a son the same age as me. If your hair was black, you might look a bit like him. In any case, we haven't seen him in 7 years, so it doesn't matter if you don't look exactly right. My mother wouldn't expect to recognise you. Who's going to deliver this letter? And do I write... You are. Sorry. You carry it with you. And do I arrive here alone with it? Joe asked. Lucy walked a few more paces around the circle. No, they'd expect you to travel with a slave. But you can say he took ill and died just before you got to Noviomagus. I'm not quite sure how far that is from here, only about half an hour, I think. The slaves walk there and back in a morning if they've been sent on an errand. Joe nodded. Noviomagus must be Chichester. He wondered for a moment about the name. He'd always thought Roman town names ended in Chester, like Chichester, but it seemed not. How will I get there? He asked. We'll ask Septimus if anyone is riding out early tomorrow morning. They can take you, and you can walk back. Wouldn't I have some kind of luggage? Joe pointed out. That's true. We'll ask Arethusa to pack your bag. If you were travelling a long way, you wouldn't want to be carrying very much, so it can be quite simple. What's my name, then? Lucy frowned. I'm not completely certain. You're the eldest son, so the first two names would be the same as your father's, which are, I think, Marcus Placidius. I know your cognomen is Valentinian. I remember my mother had a letter from Severina Orbiana before we moved here, so I'll try and check. You remember a single letter? Of course, they're really rare. Someone has to carry them, so they cost a lot to send. Anyway, if I'm right, I think I know where it would be, so I'll creep in and find it. I'll go and find Arethusa as well. Wait here, I won't be long. Lucy slipped out through the bushes, leaving Joe alone. He watched through the leaves as she ran up the lawn to the palace. Then he got up and went over to her branch. He bounced a little, like she'd been doing, but then stopped, afraid that it would make the leaves of the shrub wave around. He made circles in the dirt with the toe of his sandal, and wondered how to pass the time. It occurred to him that he might usefully inspect his clothes to see exactly what he was wearing, and to make sure he knew how to do all the fastenings. Nothing should be left to chance this time. So he undid and did up his sandals, then took off his belt and tunic, and checked his shirt, shorts and underwear, before putting the tunic back on. Lucy was gone some time. Joe was just beginning to worry when he heard footsteps on the grass nearby. He sat completely still. It's only me, she said, pushing the branches aside. Sorry it took so long. Arethusa will be here in a few minutes with everything she needs for your hair. There isn't really anywhere else that we can risk doing it. She brandished a scroll of something like papyrus. I found this, though. Shall we have a lesson on your family, or at least your family as it was 4 years ago when she wrote? My mother may well ask after everyone. Lucy snapped a twig from one of the shrubs and began to scratch the ground with it, pausing to refer to the scroll now and then. Joe watched as she drew a family tree on the bare earth between them. After a minute he said, Why don't you give me the twig? I'll remember better if I write their names myself, and you'll have both hands to hold that open to read. I'm not very good at Roman numerals either, so it would be easier for me if I wrote down their ages my way. Lucy handed the twig to him and sat down on the stump, puzzling over the numbers Joe wrote beside each name. Let me make sure I've got this right, he said when they'd finished. After me, there's Placidia, who was born the year before they left Verulamium. She's now 8. Then there is Claudia, who's now 6, and Gregorius, who had just been born when this letter was written, so he must be 4. Shall we add an extra child? If you like. Let's have a 2-year-old boy then. Give me a name. Quintilius, Lucy said, since he's the 5th child. Right. Joe scratched the name in the ground. Have I spelled that right? That's fine. You can put 1 L or 2. It doesn't matter. And what's the name of the place where they are now? Mancunium. Joe grinned. Manchester. Lucy looked blank. If you say so. Marcus Placidius is a general in the army. That's where he was posted, and they were still there 4 years ago. We don't know for sure that they haven't moved since, but my mother wouldn't know that either. So my father wouldn't be married to my mother then? Jo said. I read that in a few of the books about soldiers not being allowed to marry until they retire. That's true, Lucy said, but lots of soldiers have families living outside the forts. That's how it was in Verulamium. You would still see him fairly often, probably as often as I see my father, and you'd still call him Pater. There was a quiet cough on the edge of the shrubbery. That'll be Arethusa. Lucy put her head through the branches. In here, she whispered. Arethusa appeared with a bucket of water and a basket. Master Jo, she exclaimed in astonishment. What are you doing here? Hello, Arethusa. Jo beamed back. I'm back. Knowing people here made him feel at home somehow. But we need to do things differently this time, Lucy said sternly. Of course, Miss Lucilia. Arethusa bowed her head at once. This time he's Valentinian, the son of my mother's old friend. He's going to need to practice answering to his new name, so it would help if you start by calling him it. Very well, miss. So I'm to dye Master Valentinian's hair? That's right, Lucy said. He needs to look different. Arethusa nodded. What do you want me to do? Jo asked. You're fine sitting on that branch, Master Valentinian, but we need you to take off your tunic and shirt. We don't want to get dye on them. Arethusa took a drape from the basket. We need to cover your skin too as much as we can. Wrap this round you. I've got some cloths for your face and neck as well. Once it's taken, the dye doesn't come off. She took a long strip of material from the basket and wrapped it around his hairline from the back of his neck, up behind his ears, to meet in the middle of his forehead. Could you hold that a moment for me, Miss Lucilia? Arethusa delved in her basket and brought out a metal clip, which she used to hold the cloth in place. Ouch, Jo grumbled. That hurts. She adjusted it and pushed another piece of cloth behind. Is that better? A bit. Stop fussing, Jo, Lucy said. It's Valentinian, remember? He said irritably. Anyway, it's all right for you. I must look ridiculous with my ears sticking out like this. Well, we don't want them getting black. Jo watched Arethusa take out a paintbrush from the basket and uncork the bottle of dye. The air was immediately filled with the most revolting stench. My God, he exclaimed, what is in that? It smells like something's died. It has. Lucy was holding her nose, but she was laughing too. Don't breathe in. You could have warned me. What is it then? Tell him, Arethusa. Arethusa's eyes danced. It's dead leeches. They've been rotted in red wine for 40 days. Jo clamped his hand to his mouth and nose. That's disgusting. I think I'm going to be sick. Don't be daft, Lucy said. Just don't breathe through your nose again. What, ever? No, stupid. The smell should escape upwards from the bushes. This is why we have to do it here. Arethusa dipped the brush into the bottle and began to paint Jo's hair. He felt the thick, cold drops of dye trickle onto his scalp. How long do I have to keep it on? He asked when she'd finished. An hour, Master Valentinian. You're joking. Of course she isn't, Lucy said. It has to have time to take before you wash it away. Arethusa will come back when it's time. I'm going to see Septimus about the letter. Don't go anywhere now, will you? She giggled. Ha ha, said Jo sourly. Left alone again, he sat and fumed. He'd looked forward so much to being here again and to seeing Lucy, but he felt like he was being punished for last time, especially since she wasn't even prepared to sit through this with him. He pinched his nostrils shut with his finger and thumb and tried not to think about the scraps of rotten leech on his scalp. The hour seemed like an eternity. He practised scratching Roman numerals in the earth, and when he tired of that, he wrote his new name over and over. He'd given up on that too when Arethusa eventually returned, carrying another bucket of water and a bag. "Here's your luggage, Master Valentinian." She hung it in one of the bushes. "Ready to wash the dye out?" "You bet," he said. "Shouldn't we wait for Lucy, though?" "No, this will take a while anyway. We need to rinse it several times before we soak the last of it away." "Do I dare ask what's in the soap?" Arethusa smiled. "Only ashes and tallow." "Tallow is animal fat, isn't it?" "That's right." Joe sighed and knelt down for her to begin rinsing. He had no idea what was in hair dye and soap at home, but he was suddenly grateful for laboratory-tested chemicals, which weren't obviously bits of dead animal and other nasty stuff. He was drying his hair on a cloth when Lucy appeared again. "It's all done." She waved another scroll triumphantly. "Septimus even managed to peel the seal off the other letter and stick it on here." "Good." "You don't sound very pleased." "I've just spent an hour sitting in a poisonous cloud on my own." He gave extra emphasis to the last 3 words to make sure she understood, but she just grinned. "It's good, though," she said. "You do look completely different. You've done a great job, Arethusa." "Thank you, Miss Lucilia." Arethusa picked up the empty buckets and the basket of stained cloths. "I should go. I need to get rid of all of this." "Of course. Please just remember when you meet him again that you've never seen Valentinian before." "Yes, miss." Arethusa bowed, then pushed her way out through the bushes. "So what happens now?" Joe asked. "Well, it depends a bit on how you smell." Lucy laughed. "Septimus said it would be safer for you to go down to the shore and walk along the coast to the footpath. He said it takes you up to the main road, so you can come along from there. He thought we shouldn't risk you being seen riding out from here to Noviomagus." "That's all fine, but what does it have to do with how I smell?" Even though he knew Lucy was talking about the dye, Joe still felt slightly offended. Lucy laughed again. "You can't be seen wandering around the palace between now and when you arrive formally. But you can't present yourself to my mother still smelling of hair dye." "I could have a swim in the sea," Joe suggested. "No, that's no good. Then you'd smell of salt water, and there's no sea between here and Noviomagus, so that wouldn't make sense on your journey." "What shall I do then?" Joe felt himself getting tetchy. Why was nothing ever simple with Lucy? "Let's go down to the shore first and see how you are once we're away from these bushes. There's so much dye still soaking away, it's hard to tell how much of the smell is from you." "Great," Joe said sarcastically. "In that case, I'm going first this time. You follow me." He stomped off, huffily, down the lawn. When he reached the shore, he picked up a stone and skimmed it across the water. A minute or 2 later, Lucy joined him. "You forgot your luggage." She put the bag down beside him. "You don't smell too bad at all, actually." "Thanks." "No, I mean it." "Yeah, right. I smell of grease and wine. Delicious." "That's all right, though," she said. "We use both for cleaning, so to me you just smell clean." "Really?" He was incredulous. "This place is mad." Lucy shook her head at him. "Right then." Joe skimmed one last stone across the sea. "What do I do?" "You take your bag and this letter. You might want to bash it up a bit, so it looks like you've been carrying it with you for a long time, and you walk along the shoreline about a quarter of an hour that way until you come to a path that leads inland." "How long would I have been travelling in total?" Joe asked. "I don't know. Maybe 2 weeks? It's a long way to walk. No kidding. And what do I do when I get here? Just come straight down the road and you'll arrive at the main entrance. Ask the slave for an audience with Helena Calvina. That's my mother. Present your letter to her and then try to act naturally. Joe swallowed. Go on then. The sooner you do it, the sooner it's over. Lucy handed him the bag and the scroll, then squeezed his arm. You'll be fine. See you soon. Good luck. Joe took a deep breath and started off along the shore away from her. So really, for the first time now, Joe is going to have to survive on his own in Lucy's world, because he's got to present himself to Lucy's family as though he doesn't know her. So that's quite a hard thing to do. I wouldn't like to have to do that, not at all. And he doesn't fancy it either, but he's got no choice. The only other thing I was going to say to you is that I've decided that tomorrow I'm going to do this at 2 o'clock and from next week onwards also at 2 instead of 2:30, because in terms of the way our days are panning out, 2:30 is sort of in the middle of nowhere. It's kind of not enough time to do very much after lunch, and it sort of stops us getting into something new in the afternoon. So I'm going to do it at 2. But I hope you're enjoying it. I'm glad to see a few of you here. It's lovely to see you online. And yeah, keep watching, keep spreading the word. I hope you're getting into it. We're nearly halfway, and it gets a whole lot more interesting from here on in as well, for me at least, as the writer. So there we are, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. All right.